I've spent my whole life hiding that I killed someone, and my own sister still believes her husband died in a stupid accident. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what happened that night years ago, when my son was barely 4 years old. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear the sound that ended everything. My sister got married young, and her husband seemed completely normal at first. At least those early years when we all believed she'd found a good man. But over time he started drinking, rarely at first, then more and more, until alcohol stopped being his weakness and became his excuse for taking his anger out on whoever was around him. I watched my sister change next to him, growing quieter, more careful, learning to read his mood before he even walked through the door. She loved him, or kept telling herself she did, and every time I tried to talk to her seriously about it, she'd ask me to stay out of it. It's her family, she'd say, and her problems. I already had my little boy by then, and my own life took up most of my energy. But I still tried to visit her more often, like some part of me sensed she needed support, even if she never admitted it herself. That spring, my son and I came to visit my sister. Her husband was already sitting in the kitchen drunk since morning, something I'd never seen from him in broad daylight before, and it put me on edge the second we walked into the yard because he sat there silent, staring past us, something heavy in his eyes. My sister drove to the pharmacy because she wasn't feeling well herself and left me alone with the kids for a little while. Sure, everything was fine since her husband just seemed to be sitting quietly at the table, bothering no one. I stepped out to the garden for a few minutes to hang the laundry, thinking my son was playing safely in the next room, within earshot, since the door was left ajar and I figured I'd hear everything. And that one short moment became the line that split my life into before and after. When I heard my son scream, I didn't think, I just ran, dropping everything in my hands. What I saw when I burst into that room, I'll never forget no matter how many years pass. What happened next in that room, I'll get to in a moment, because it deserves to be told carefully and honestly, not rushed. Right now, something else matters more. That evening, when the ambulance and police arrived, I told them her husband had fallen, slipped on the wet floor, and hit his head. They believed me, because the alcohol in his blood confirmed he'd been severely drunk, and I was just a young woman with frightened eyes, someone nobody had any reason to doubt. My sister cried on my shoulder that evening and thanked me for being there, with no idea how far the truth was from what she'd been told. Even before the police arrived, I'd already made up my mind. No one would ever find out what really happened. Not my sister, not my own son when he grew up, not anyone. I believed the truth would only destroy what was left of our family, and that my sister simply wouldn't survive learning the details of what happened to her husband in that room. The first few months after, I lived like I was underwater, going through the motions on autopilot, going to work, cooking, putting my son to bed. And at night, I'd lie awake for hours, replaying every second of that day in my head. Over time, it started fading into the background, though it never fully went away. My son grew, got older, and I learned to live with what happened, hiding it even from myself most of the time. My sister eventually remarried, a calm, good man, and seemed to finally find the happiness she'd been missing for so long. I'd look at her and think maybe none of it had been for nothing, that my silence had given her a shot at a normal life. I'd started to believe that night was buried for good, along with whatever happened in that room, and the years passed peacefully without a single sign the truth might ever surface. My son grew up, finished school, started his adult life, and I thought the worst was behind me, that I'd made it through and could just live my life now. Then one day, not too long ago, a woman called me that I hadn't heard from in years, our old neighbor from that same house where it all happened, and her first words froze me solid. She said she remembered that day far better than I could have imagined, and that she needed to see me, because there were things, in her words, that were long overdue to talk about. That call sent me straight back to that spring day at my sister's house, the same day I'd gone out to the garden to hang laundry, while my son stayed behind in the next room. In that room, I saw my sister's husband gripping my son's arm so hard he was screaming in pain, while the man himself, drunk and unsteady, mumbled something under his breath, like he had no idea where he was or who was standing in front of him. He was shaking him around like he was some object in his way, and his eyes were empty, glassy. Nothing like the eyes of the man I'd known for years. I don't remember how I got there. I only remember tearing my son out of his hands and shoving him to make him let go, and he, losing his balance, fell backward and hit his head on the edge of the fireplace. The sound it made, dull and heavy, still follows me to this day, in the most unexpected moments, right when I least expect it. He dropped instantly and didn't move again, and I stood there holding my son, who was still crying, unable to understand myself what had just happened. I checked for a pulse over and over, but it was gone, and in that second I understood my life had just split in two. I didn't want to kill him. I only wanted one thing, for him to let go of my child, and that's exactly why, when I later decided to hide the truth, I never felt guilty over the fact of what happened. What I was afraid of was something else entirely, that no one would believe it was self-defense, that the investigation would drag on for years, that my little boy would be forced to testify against his own uncle, and that my sister would lose her husband and learn in the same breath that I was the one who killed him. So even before the ambulance arrived, I made up a different version, cleaned up the traces in the room, wiped away anything that might look suspicious, and when the police showed up, I told them about the wet floor and the unlucky fall so convincingly that for a while I almost believed it myself. The neighbor who called me after all these years used to live in the house across the street and, as it turned out, had been standing in her yard that day and heard my son scream, then watched through her window as I walked out of the room, pale and shaking all over. She said nothing at the time because, in her words, she figured it wasn't her business. But now, after all these years, she'd fallen on hard financial times and decided my secret was worth more than her silence. We met at a coffee shop on the edge of town, and she told me right away she needed a large sum of money, or she'd go to the police and tell them everything she'd seen and heard that day. I sat across from her, looking at her calm, almost indifferent face, thinking about how all my caution, all those years of silence, could come crashing down because one person had decided to profit off someone else's tragedy. I asked her straight out if she wasn't ashamed to demand money over something that involved a child, not someone's property. She just shrugged and said times were hard and everyone had to get by however they could. That answer convinced me for good that there was no point negotiating with someone like her, because today she'd want one amount and tomorrow she'd want more. She added that she was giving me a week to think it over, and that if the money didn't show up in her account, she'd go straight to the station herself and tell them everything she knew, including how, in her words, I'd cleaned up the scene that night. I walked out of that coffee shop on stiff legs, barely made it to my car, and sat behind the wheel for a long time, unable to bring myself to drive, because my hands were shaking so hard I was afraid I couldn't hold the wheel steady. I told her I needed time to think, though I already knew by then I wasn't going to pay, because I understood that if I gave in once, she'd keep coming back again and again, and it would never end. That night, I couldn't sleep for hours, running through every possible option in my head, and finally realized there was only one way left to stop being afraid: tell the truth myself before someone else did it for me. And telling the truth meant starting with the one person who had the right to hear it first: my son. In the morning, I called him and asked him to come over, telling him only that we needed to talk about something serious. He showed up worried, thinking something was wrong with my health, and when he saw me sitting pale and silent at the kitchen table, he sat down across from me right away and took my hand. I told him everything, start to finish, without leaving out a single detail: how his uncle had grabbed his arm in that room that day, drunk, how I'd run in and shoved him off, how he'd fallen and hit his head, how I'd hidden the truth for all those years to protect him and his aunt from the pain of it. I talked for a long time, my voice shaking, my hands never quite steady, and when I finished, the room went completely silent. My son sat quiet for several long seconds, looking at me like he was trying to piece his whole childhood back together in his head. Then he squeezed my hand tighter and said he barely remembered that day, just fragments, fear and someone's hands that had saved him, and that now he finally understood where that feeling came from, the sense that his mom would always protect him no matter the cost. He said he didn't judge me, that, if anything, he was proud of how strong I'd been in that 1 second when I had to act instead of think. I asked him if he was scared that other people would find out now, that he might have to go through an investigation, a trial, stranger stares. He said he was far less scared of that than he'd be of living the rest of his life knowing his mother was carrying that weight alone and could get hurt by a blackmailer at any moment. Then he asked me straight out if I knew who this neighbor was and where to find her, and when I said I knew the coffee shop where we'd met, he said firmly that we were going to the police together, that we'd tell the truth ourselves before. She got the chance to do it first. I looked at him for a long moment, this grown, self-assured man he'd become, and thought about how many years I'd been afraid of exactly this moment, and instead of judgment, I got his support. He stood up from the table, came over, hugged me tight, and said only this: "Mom, you saved me that day. Now it's my turn to be there for you." We got dressed and walked out of the house together, got in the car to drive to the police station. On the way there, he kept one hand on the wheel and reached the other one out to me, and I took it, feeling the warmth of it slowly settle the shaking that hadn't left me all morning. When we pulled up outside the station, he shut off the engine, looked at me, and said, "Whatever they say in there, I'm with you, every step of it." The detective listened to my statement in silence, writing down every detail. When I finished, he told me that given the circumstances, with a living witness willing to confirm the danger the child had been in, the case would very likely be classified as self-defense, especially since so many years had passed with no signs it had ever been intentional. He added that the person who tried to blackmail me would also be brought in for questioning, and that demanding money to stay quiet about a crime that never happened was itself a criminal offense, against her, not against me. The following weeks were hard, full of interviews, forensic reviews of the old case file, and conversations with a lawyer. But not once through any of it did my son leave me alone. He showed up to every meeting, sat beside me in the hallways, held my hand in the moments I was most afraid of hearing bad news. In the end, the investigation confirmed exactly what I'd known all along. I'd been protecting my child, and I never once intended to kill anyone. When the case was officially closed, my son and I walked out of the courthouse together. He hugged me without a word right there on the steps. Tight, long, the way you hold someone who can finally breathe out after years of holding their breath. Then he pulled back, looked me in the eyes, and said, "You're finally free now, Mom. And I want you to know I'll always be proud of who you were in that 1 second when I needed you." And for the first time in 22 years, I breathed out, truly and completely at ease.